Yes. So YouTube has started and Jeff Norris has the closed captioning, so we're good to go.
Okay, then I would like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting. This is the rescheduled Finance Committee meeting that was supposed to take place on Monday, the 4th. Instead, we rescheduled to today, January 12th at 5 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, you can. Counselor Beta.
Here.
Counselor Villarreal.
Present.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth.
I'm here.
Counselor Lindell.
I'm here.
Counselor Cassett Sanchez.
Here.
Did I get everybody? I believe I did.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. The next item is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Anything from the committee? Is there a motion regarding the agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Beta.
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal.
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Counselor Lindell.
Yes.
And Counselor Cassett Sanchez. Counselor Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next is approval of the consent agenda. Items to be removed from the consent agenda. Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Item E and item I.
Okay. Okay, other items to be removed. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Item H and item I.
Item H and item I. Okay, other items, Councilwoman Villarreal.
The ones I wanted to pull have already been suggested. Thanks.
Okay, and Councilwoman Romero Worth.
I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we have items E, items H, and item I have been removed from the consent calendar. Can I have a motion to approve the consent calendar as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Counselor Beta.
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal.
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Counselor Lindell.
Yes.
Counselor Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is approval of the minutes, and they are from the Finance Committee meeting of November 30th, 2020. Are there any changes from staff?
No, Chair Beta, there's no changes.
Okay, changes from the committee. Can I have a motion regarding the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Beta.
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal.
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Counselor Lindell.
Yes.
And Counselor Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to the action items that were pulled from the consent calendar. The first will be item E, which is a request for approval of the 2020 Emergency Management Performance Grant in the total amount of $175,160 for salary and benefits, the New Mexico Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Mr. Mason. I see that you're here. Just a couple questions on this. Your position used to be funded from this grant, correct?
Counselor Chair, yes.
Okay. So is this a matching grant?
Chairman and Counselor, yes, this is a match-based grant. That's why the dollar value is so high. It's a 50-50 grant match. My current salary, which is budgeted in the city's budget, is the match for that. That's why the grant is $87,580 towards a new position's salary and benefit. And then of my position, $87,580 is matched to make that position possible.
So just to clarify, are we hiring another person?
Correct. We cannot use this funds for anything other than a new position or equipment, because otherwise that would be supplantation. So we can't use it for myself, the emergency management director, or the other existing position in my emergency management section, which is Brian Williams, emergency management specialist. So this is for a third position, emergency management coordinator.
So in terms of our budget, did we ask for another position?
Chairman, Counselor, it didn't seem like it was ever going to be in the cards. Originally, in one of the first budgets, it was proposed as one of my initiatives, but it was removed.
So, Chair, I would look to you or to Ms. McCoy. Don't we need to go through a budget and have the position rather than to create positions this way?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, I can add some more information. For grant-funded positions in our city's HR classifications, job classification system, those positions are term positions. So those positions are authorized for the term of the grant. So it's not like we are adding a permanent classified position that would then we would need to fund regardless of whether or not we received the funding for from this grant or not. So this is a separate classification where the term of the grant dictates the term of the employment.
I guess my concern on this is actually adding more personnel. I don't know if we, need more personnel. We didn't ask for more personnel. And it looks like this grant could be used to purchase other things. Is that true, rather than to use it toward personnel?
Chairman, Counselor, yes, it can be utilized. Right now, this grant, this cycle will not be utilized for anything other than what is identified in the subgrant agreement attached to the packet, which is salary and benefits. We do have to do an extensive application period competitively throughout the state, and this is what they have approved us to use the money for. So if it's not approved for this grant cycle, it will get returned to the federal government.
Well, this just presents a little bit of a dilemma for me of expanding departments that we don't really have. We don't know what that justification is, or what, even though I get it, it's federal money. We don't want to return it, but we still have a matching part of this. And I know that we're going to pass this, but I'm not, I would like to not do business this way. We don't really see a request of why we needed another person, how that all works. And it just doesn't seem to me like the exact right way to go about doing business. It's federal money, we don't want to lose that, but I don't know that we needed this position, or if we'd have been better off using these monies to purchase to request purchase for some other emergency equipment that we might need. Certainly in the last year, you guys have done a terrific job with personal protective equipment for lots of people in lots of different places. So I'm not going to vote against this, but I don't really like doing business this way. It doesn't seem, it seems like we're expanding just because we have the money from the federal government. And I think we might have maybe looked at this and seen if there was a better way to use it. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Councilor Lindell. Ms. McCoy, I don't believe we have anybody from HR on the Zoom cast or whatever we call these meetings. But when we advertise for this position, we will disclose that it is grant funded and it's temporary, right? Or term based on the grant. Will we not?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, yes, that has been my experience in the city's HR system. If a position is classified as a term position because it is funded by a non-recurring source of funding, that is that information is readily available in the job description and upon the terms and conditions of employment. So as soon as this funding, and I would defer to Kyle to review the term of the funding agreement as well as the job roles and duties of this particular position and why the funding request was made for additional staff as opposed to equipment or other items that we could have requested. But as far as the term of the agreement would match the term of the employment. So as soon as the funding expires from the grant from the federal government, the person would no longer be employed with the city. But Kyle, I defer to you for any additional information about the position.
Okay, now I agree though with Councilor Lindell. I think we need to do a better job, especially at budget time for these departments specifically, or these areas where we know that they have more access to grant funding or opportunities throughout the year than others. Maybe we need to do a better job of disclosing to us that while there's not a position proposed today as we do this budget, there is the potential for grant funding throughout the fiscal year where we may land up with a position or two. Councilor Lindell.
So, Mr. Mason, you said that your position has been in the past financed through this grant. Is that correct?
Chairman, Councilor Lindell, that is correct.
Well, why did we change it?
So for the grant period 2017 and 2018, either that or 2016 and 2017, my position was funded previously when it was David Silver. At that time, we decided to change the funding from staff funding to a project to update the Midtown campus to provide the city with an emergency operations center. At that time, the city picked up the budgetary costs for the emergency management director's position, and the emergency operations center was developed and funded through those initiatives through this grant. At that time, we are unable to move the funding back to a budgeted position due to federal law. And from there, it has been very successful for other emergency management departments throughout the state of New Mexico to fund staff through this grant. Every year, large numbers of emergency management directors or their support staff are funded through the Emergency Management Performance Grant. That being said, we do have ample work for this new staff member to conduct. We'd like to expand trainings and exercises to help support the airport and the dam operations in the city of Santa Fe to be able to conduct full-scale tabletops, drills of those such, as well as expanding to other departments.
Thank you. as I said, I just, this is not how we should be expanding departments. We should be doing that through the budget procedure, not through finding a federal grant. And, I'm not really sure why we don't go back and pay your salary out of this instead of we're making a match. This is us paying more money at a time when we don't have that much money. I'm sure of that. So like I said, I'm not going to vote against this, but I don't think that this is a really particularly good way for us to be doing business. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I agree with Councilor Lindell. Ms. McCoy, can we make sure that we highlight this during our mid-year budget, and then we get an update during the fiscal year budget approval for next year, where we talk about this department specifically, and because I also see the importance of and the access to federal grant money that this department has as opposed to others. And so I just think we need to, I agree with Councilor Lindell, we need to stay ahead of it as best as we can as a finance committee.
Mr. Chair, councilors, yes, we'd be happy to review that during our annual budget process. There's one other key item that Kyle did mention that I want to highlight, and we can go into more specifics during our annual budgeting process. That's actually the concept of supplanting. So since we are currently and have already made for the last few fiscal years the commitment to pay 2 FTEs out of our general fund, the feds, if we were then to request that either Kyle's position as director or the emergency management specialist position be paid out of federal funds, that is what the feds consider supplanting. And that is what is not allowed. So since the city has already made that commitment to pay, that is essentially our baseline, and we have to continue that commitment. Any additional federal funds would be, could be used for additional staff or additional equipment or supplies that would be made. So I think that's a key point to understanding why we cannot use these funds to pay for anything that the city is currently committed to paying for.
Okay, well, and this is why I'd like to have these discussions at mid-year and then again at budget with this specific section or department of the city, because we do have access to grant money, but then you can also put yourself in a position where if you accept the grant, you may be agreeing to eventually fund the entire operation or position or whatever the grant is funding out of your general fund in year 2 or 3 or whenever the grant runs out. So yeah, I think sometimes this is a small department in a small area, so we pass through it real quickly when we're approving the budget. And then we have situations like this come up during the year where, like Councilor Lindell said, it feels like we're maybe approving expansion of positions without, outside of our budgeting process. So, okay, any other comments or concerns from the committee on this item? Is there a motion? I'll move for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Okay, so that item's been approved. That brings us to item H, which is a resolution hosting community conversations and establishing a special city committee on Santa Fe's cultures, histories, art, reconciliation, and truth. Now we have a couple of things going on with this. First, we received public comment, a email from Councilor Ron Trujillo, who is also the president of Caballeros de Vargas. When we get started, I would ask Ms. Roybal if you could read that into the record for us and make sure that all of the finance committee and members of the governing body receive the email. Mr. Trujillo took the time, Councilor Trujillo took the time to write to us. I think it's important that we acknowledge that and we take a minute or two to hear what he has to say. Then I'd like to get into the budget make sure we cover the budget that Ms. Kamiyama put together for us. Since we are the Finance Committee, I think it's very important that we take time to take a look at that budget and make recommendations. Then Councilwoman Villarreal has introduced amendments. So then I'll turn it over to her to allow her to present her amendments. Then we will consider those amendments and the substitute resolution. Councilor Garcia has joined us. He's got a couple of amendments, I think, according to what Mr. Guillen passed out. If there's time permitting, I'd like to give him the opportunity to present what I think are his two amendments, and then we can hopefully act on the substitute resolution and forward it on to the council for tomorrow evening. So Ms. Roybal, can you please read into the record the email we received from former Councilor and President of the Caballeros de Vargas, Mr. Trujillo's email?
Absolutely. This is a comment from Ronald S. Trujillo. Members of the Finance Committee, as President of Caballeros de Vargas, I want to ensure that Caballeros de Vargas are one of the many organizations that will be allowed to speak and voice our opinion when this committee is passed by the City Council. We are the organization that donated the de Vargas statue to the city that once stood proudly in Cathedral Park until it was removed in the middle of the night by the mayor without any dialogue with the Caballeros de Vargas. Part of this committee's job will be to determine the fate of monuments and statues throughout the city of Santa Fe. I want to ensure that Caballeros de Vargas have a seat at any table where the fate of the statue and our Hispanic culture, history, and traditions are discussed to ensure that our concerns are heard and addressed. I can assure you that we, the Caballeros de Vargas, are one organization that want to be part of the discussion. Caballeros de Vargas' mission is to perpetuate the memory of Captain General y Gobernador Don Diego de Vargas. And we are committed to the mission and will continue that mission here in our beloved Santa Fe. I have sent a letter to Mayor Weber asking for a meeting between the Caballeros, the mayor, members of the city council, city manager, and our legal staff. I sent a letter to the mayor asking for a meeting in early December and just received a response from the mayor, but nothing in the letter addressed if and when this meeting would take place. Therefore, I am asking you councilors to ensure that a meeting is set up between Los Caballeros and the city of Santa Fe to discuss our statue of Don Diego de Vargas. What I and many are concerned about, this new resolution is now the new group is open to anyone. And as I have witnessed, Three Sisters and Red Nation organized well, and my concern is that they will again ship in people not from here to speak in these meetings. Thus, once again, their numbers of people will probably outnumber those who actually have skin in the game. Please do your diligence on this resolution and listen to all counselors and their concerns. As one who served for 12 years on the council, I saw firsthand how the mayor has his votes, thus any opposition can be easily thwarted off by the majority. And thus a resolution that should be written to address all concern is thus passed and addresses only the concerns of a few. Ronald S. Trujillo, Presidente Caballeros de Vargas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roybal. And again, thank you, Councilor Trujillo, for taking the time to reach out to the Finance Committee. The next item is a draft budget for the resolution. Ms. Kamiyama, can you please present the budget to us? I believe either yourself or Christine emailed us the budget, so we can take a few minutes looking at that. And then if there's any questions, we will ask questions, or if there's changes or amendments to the budget we'd like to recommend, we will do that. And then we will talk about the resolution itself. So Ms. Kamiya, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Is it all right if I share my screen to show the budget? That might be the easiest way to discuss it.
Yes, if you have that authority. If not, Joe, can you give her that authority?
It's enabled, Counselor.
Thank you.
All right. Are you able to see this?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll just go item by item, and Christine and I will address any questions. Again, this is a draft budget. It is informed. Yes.
Can you expand the view of this? Because we see the other documents. Is there a way to do full screen for the budget?
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And I'll just scroll up and down. Okay. So it is a draft budget. It's informed by the substitute resolution as it stands now. So there's an understanding that the budget will evolve and change as necessary. But the main focus, I have it broken down into two main categories. One is the actual convenings and what that takes, and the other section would be the administration. So we all know that we need to find a lead facilitator or coordinator, and that person tasked to be with the city project team is to look at how to formulate and design the community dialogue sessions. Again, this is generally informed by the Albuquerque model, taking what we've learned, best practices from them, as well as evolving and having it to be an iterative process to match our needs here in Santa Fe. So we'll look at helping to design it. We will also have them train the facilitators. So again, there will be a team of facilitators, but the lead coordinator is really people coordinating or project managing them. We are also looking at the lead facilitator to match co-facilitators. That will also help work with the city team to develop a survey. And then again, all the reporting out, meetings with the city team, how are we going to design the community solutions table? I know there's been a lot of questions with that. They'll also be in charge of note taking and collecting that data. So the stories and the data and the other things that might come with it that will help inform the community solutions table and eventually to the governing body. In addition, I've put in there that we're looking at a component of train the trainer because I anticipate these conversations to continue on. They just don't stop after a year. And so are we ready and prepared to continue these dialogues and these types of engagement? And to do so, how do we ensure that happens with training of community facilitators later on? So I have one budget for $25,000, and then I called it a community team facilitators. We anticipate 50 sessions, or let's call it 50 cohorts, and each cohort consists of 2 co-facilitators and then three sessions as it stands now. So that is the training, the prep, the materials, and then the debrief and the write-ups to facilitate those. And then that's the meat of getting a lot of the community engagement and working with the city project manager, which is further down in the budget. Also called out for is artist activations, a minimum of at least 2 that could expand out. I put in there a placeholder of 10,000 for an activation that could, so a total budget of 20,000. Again, a draft budget, this could morph and change. So if we wanted to do more activations for for 5,000 throughout the city, that's an option as well. But it is suggested to have at least 2 types of activations, whether they're installations and or virtual or a combination of both. Also, what's very important is to have a historical overview. And so that's inviting cultural stakeholders and bearers, as well as historians, to talk about the history and our stories as a grounding baseline. And that would be available, I think, to everybody through a webinar or like a Zoom type presentation. And I anticipate 5 folks to do that, or 5 sessions. It could be a combination or a panel discussion, or one person doing that. So again, that is a very important component. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down and talk about the administration. The project manager, which will be a consultant to the city, that is to serve as a liaison between the city. And I should have changed this from committee to the facilitator. And will really be the ones helping us help with outreach and to coordinate. We'll also be in charge of communications. And if there's more questions specific to that, I'll have Christine address that. I'm going to move on to the next, but the consultant to the city is a major component for us. It's both for Christine and I's department, but that consultant is going to be the glue between the city project team as well as the facilitation team. So we'll be all working together, as well as other members of the city. The next thing that's really important, because when we talk about Culture Connects, we talk about accessibility. And so accessibility means many things, but right now we're focusing in on language translation, sign language, if we need American Sign Language. We also need it converted into materials and closed captioning and other things like that. So we put in some monies for that. And then also included towards the end is a writer/editor to look at doing our reports, as well as any historical overviews. How are we going to capture that data? The lead facilitator will present a report form, but then that gets further fleshed out into several reports and whatever that looks like, but definitely a final one. And then also with suggestions. In addition to that, we have a graphic designer looking at, and I just put design up, 3 types of designs, but that could also include any flyers or anything like that that we might need. And then the printing cost for that. And so for that total is $265,500. And then if on the bottom 2 sections is desirable if there's budget, and of course we will have to do a lot of fundraising, both private and public, combined as a partnership. We are anticipating and appreciate that we want to focus in person if it's preferable. And when we are able to meet in person, then we know that we must have some sort of refreshment, water, snacks, things like that. And also childcare if possible, which is not in there, but I think we can do that under a different line item. And then we have miscellaneous admin materials, how to get the messaging out. Supplies for our facilitation team, and again, this I didn't catch the chart committee members, which is not in the substitute resolution right now. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Gives you a broad overview. Again, it is a draft, and happy to answer any questions or further think about what we're missing, what needs to be adjusted.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Pauline, for presenting. I have a few questions on the budget. One thing that I really want to consider looking at that I think is really important is that as we are gathering this data, we need to be looking at the correct methods of evaluation to really be sure that we are mining the appropriate information that is going to be able to inform decisions. And especially since so much of this is conversation, it's going to be interviews. I think that we need to look at somebody that has a specialty in qualitative data analysis, as well as, looking at how are we really going to make sure that we are developing surveys that are valid surveys. So, when we talk about survey development, we look at validity? How do you protect against bias? And so really making sure that if we are going to take the time and energy to do this, that we have the tools in place, that we are using experts that have the training to do this, and that we also have people that can help us pull that information out in a way that really can be beneficial as we are looking at decisions. So that's one area that I would really like to see in the final draft of this is especially that evaluation piece, somebody who is an expert in qualitative evaluation, as it is it's a very different field when you are really diving into it. The other thing I'd like to
on that point.
Yes, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
I think it's a good one because there'll be qualitative and quantitative analysis that will be necessary. And I think the question that I don't have a very good understanding of is whether we have that expertise within city government or whether we'll need to call out specific money in the budget to get that expertise. So I think that's an outstanding question that needs a little attention. So thank you, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, for bringing that up.
And thank you. I agree that if we already have it somewhere within the city, absolutely, let's utilize the resources that we have. So just making sure that there is either a staff member or dollars allocated to that purpose. I would like to hear a little bit more about the need for a project manager at $25,000 and why this is not something that would be covered. When I'm reading the description of what those activities would be, it sounds like something that would be covered by the, what are we calling it, the city project team. There are some things that we already do, such as creating our meetings, communications and social media, managing budgets. So I really am curious why we have allocated dollars for that position as opposed to utilizing city staff time. And I don't know who best to answer that. Maybe Pauline, maybe Christine.
Council Chair Obeitha, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, I can go ahead and start, and then Pauline can further clarify if need be. But basically, oh, thanks. And the screen share just went off. Thanks, Pauline. The thought process behind that is, again, this is a huge task, and we absolutely recognize the commitment to the community and to the process. And so having a person that's designated similar, to other liaisons for committees or activities, really having an individual that could be the project manager for this was something we felt absolutely necessary. Neither Pauline nor myself have a project kind of manager within our departments as well. And so using a contract position to assist with all of this and oversight was really something that we felt strongly about between our two departments.
Okay, thank you. So kind of what I'm hearing is that we don't have the staff to cover it, which is a pretty common conversation that I feel that we are having these days. And one thing that, I know that we've been bringing up a lot recently and some of the concerns about looking at how understaffed we are. I think that this is another case where we need to really be thinking about, especially this community engagement department as we are developing it. What do we really want it to do, and what staff do we need? And Christine, this was a concern that we had of putting too much on you in our most recent conversations about the merging of the clerk's office and community engagement director position. So I think that's just something that we need to be very cognizant of as we move into budget season, as we start to look at positions. It definitely concerns me that we frequently, this is something that we definitely could utilize somebody with staff to do, and that we could be utilizing for other things. So I understand right now we don't have the staff time, but I suppose this is more to my fellow governing body members, that as we are looking at budget and as we are looking at allocating positions, we really need to be thinking about how frequently I am seeing this conversation come up about not having staff time. Okay, the next one, language accessibility. I see Spanish and American Sign Language being called out. I'm curious about other languages that have been thought about. Did we think about Tewa? Did we think about other members of our community who might be speaking other languages, who would like to participate? And would we be able to have flexibility in these languages, or are these the two that we have targeted and we won't be able to expand if the need does arise?
Councilor Chair Abetha and Councilor Cassette Sanchez, no, there is flexibility. Again, this was kind of just a draft to highlight that we recognize the need for translation services, and these were the two that we used for examples. But we can modify and say as necessary, or if there's other languages that come up that would request that.
Okay, wonderful. And I think that as part of, as we are communicating to the community about participating, of letting them know that if there are some language barriers, to reach out to us to make sure that people don't self-select out because they think that they wouldn't be able to understand, which of course, begs the question, how do we communicate this message out, which I know is something that we've been working hard on. And Spanish is absolutely the big one, and we've spoken of that frequently. Graphic designer, don't we have a graphic designer within city staff?
Yes.
Yeah.
You do, right?
Sorry, yes, Councilor Chair Betha, Councilor Cassette Sanchez, yes. Yes, we do, and hopefully we'll utilize those services, but also for additional services. And Councilor Cassette Sanchez, I think just to further articulate a point that you've highlighted is this was our first attempt at it, but also recognizing that this project was not something that we were able to include in our budget originally or anticipated as our normal workload. Kind of, obviously this has come about in between the budget seasons for fiscal years. And so that's why some of these are in that. I think if it was a project or ongoing activities, there might be some other discussions taking place, but I do want to recognize that some of the draft budget is helping us add some capacity because this was unanticipated in many ways.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Christine. That is very true that it came up in between and while there were a lot of things happening. I guess that is one of my questions that as we move forward with the community engagement department is, again, looking at that. What do we really want that to look like? And is there going to be need as we move forward with improving our engagement, and will there be sustained need for potentially actual positions here? Childcare, I love the mention of that, so thank you. I really wanted to call out that you recognize that is a barrier for so many individuals, especially if we move back to in-person. We have had conversations though about how the lessons we have learned in the COVID world might actually lend itself to being a city government that you can more easily engage with by having virtual as well as in person. So something else to think about too, that we might, who knows what the world's going to look like, but things to think about there. And then this is a question for Mary. And I'm sorry if I missed it somewhere, but where are these dollars coming from?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, that's a great question. At this time, if this passes on Wednesday, passes governing body, what we will be doing is, and we are currently identifying where we have capacity within the FY21 budget that was approved. So if this passes on Wednesday, we will be bringing forward a budget adjustment for a vote to council to identify the amount of funding to support these items that you all are discussing tonight as part of the budget. So and we look forward to, at that point, about 5.5 months of a fiscal year. And we know that this, again, if this passes on Wednesday, this is also something we will have to factor into the FY22 budget when we bring it forward for your consideration in the spring.
On that
So
point,
about-
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilor Romero Worth.
I think the other thing that is a possibility, if assuming we do this right and create a community-centered community conversation that is has a lot of credibility, we might be able to get outside support to help us in this, and so that's another possibility as we start to move down this road. So just want to throw that out. Thank you.
Councilor Cassette Sanchez.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Marworth. I of course would very much encourage us to be looking for those dollars, considering we all know where we were this past fiscal year, and we know that we're definitely not out of the woods. We're still in the middle of them. So, Mary, my understanding, so about 5.5 months, we'd be finding from the FY21 budget somewhere, and then we would have to allocate the additional 6.5 months. Did I do that math right? From the FY22 budget, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassette Sanchez, yes, that is correct.
Okay, those are all my questions on the budget. So thank you all for bringing this draft budget forward to us. I think it's really helpful to have it here to discuss it, especially as we still have some opportunities before the final vote. And as Pauline mentioned many times, I do appreciate the understanding of the fluidity of this process. And I think that that's something in Councilor Villarreal's amendment, she mentions bringing forward some reports to City Council, and I think the budget piece would be one that I would either want to see as part of those reports to Council, or even if it's some coming to the Finance Committee as that's our duty. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for providing us with the draft budget. It was helpful to see the breakdown and what are the specific or potential line items that we would have. Just a few questions. Did you think about maybe the lead facilitator or coordinator hiring someone themselves to help with the project management, so that they would be kind of in charge and working regularly with the person, so that staff wouldn't have to necessarily manage that person? So say you would up the amount for the facilitator amount, and then they would utilize whatever amount they want to have a project manager that would do support the liaison aspect? Or is there another point to the project manager that you wanted it to be independent and separate from the facilitator?
Chair and Councilwoman Villarreal, I think I like that it could be a combination. So the city liaison, because there is so much with the Zoom and the Open Meeting Act and different things like that, and the coordination between it made sense to have that part, at least that function, be internal to it. But I can see, like, as you're suggesting, that it could be a shared responsibility as part of the facilitation team. Definitely they would be working in coordination, and Christine can, flesh this out a little bit more. As far as the communication and the messaging of how we're going to do engagement versus how we're going to do the outreach and, let's say, recruitment of participants and organizations, that's going to have to be a really combined effort. And Christine, I think if you have anything to add to that.
Thanks, Pauline. No, I agree. It's definitely something to consider, and I hope that we'll find somebody we all can work with. But I think just knowing how closely we'll be working with members of the city team, it was important, but definitely can be a shared role.
Yeah, just throwing that out there in case you want to minimize the amount of management of individuals and focus on their team, and then have them kind of coordinate in their own right. But that's just a thought. And it also made me think that the lead facilitator, the 25K wasn't enough, but I think it'll depend on how maybe they organize their team. For the coordinator, well, for the team facilitators, we talked about, you said that it was 2 co-facilitators that would hold 3 sessions per cohort, and there would be 50 cohorts. Is that correct? Okay. And I think just for clarity purposes, it would help to move the 50 to the description, because it looks like you would hire 50 team facilitators when you look at quantity. So maybe there's a better way to explain that you would have 50 sessions, but you're really looking at 2 facilitators, co-facilitators, and I'm assuming they get paid each time they do a breakout session. Is that how you saw that?
Am I unmute? Okay. Thank you, Chair, Councilwoman. It is, if we have, so per cohort, which is 3 sessions, that the total cost in that is going to be about $2,500 per cohort. And so there will be more than just 2 facilitators. There's a lead facilitator and then a whole team of other facilitators. So let's say there's 20 facilitators, and then we can pair, or the lead facilitator will pair them up and mix them up as it goes. But so I don't know how to more clearly list.
I see where you're going. When I look at this, it looks like 50 coordinators,
right?
Facilitators, because you're doing by quantity. But just a thought of that, because that was confusing to me. I realized that you would have more facilitators. I was just trying to figure out how that would work. So maybe just clarify that in some way in the description.
On that point, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilor.
Is it possible, I think, the number we'd probably need to hire somewhere between 5 to 10, is that right? So couldn't you just say 5 to 10 and then try to do an estimation of how many cohorts they'd be facilitating, and that would be the cost of that 5 to 10 team of facilitators underneath the lead facilitator? Because it's probably a moving target. We don't know, right? It depends on our participation levels. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilor.
So yeah, if we could just clarify that line item, that would be helpful. Think it's great that you're providing historical overview with historians that would get, I'm assuming, stipends to participate. So that's great. For the language accessibility, just to clarify, I did agree there may be a need for Tewa translation. I did want to clarify that we need to add in not just translation, but interpretation.
Mm.
So I'd rather those are 2 separate things. Translation is the written form or the text, and the interpretation is actually for people that are participating either in person or virtually. So just to make sure we add that in. And then yes to childcare for sure, if we're able to meet in person. And I guess, let me see. I think that's it. I just want to reiterate thinking about the project management in partnership with the lead facilitator and how that team will look, and less management on your part as city staff. Although we know that you'll be combining efforts and you need each other, and there'll be a lot of coordination there, but I just think it might be easier on your part to have them form a facilitation team, and the project management would fit into that. And then it would be less kind of on your plate in terms of managing individuals. So that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one thing I want to discuss, which is and this did come up last night in terms of how we will communicate with the public and the council about the progress of the work that goes on throughout the year. And from our Albuquerque neighbors, they had talked about the fact that they set up a website and added content throughout the process. Just wondering, I think websites these days can be created fairly inexpensively, and I think we have a lot of talent in-house to help do that. But have you given any thought to what that would cost and how we allow for that to happen? Because I think it'll be a really important communication tool.
Councilor Chair Abetha, Councilor Romero Worth. Yes, we have discussed that, and we plan on using the website as a tool. We've looked at hosting a page within our current website structures and then being able to update it mostly internally because we'll have the content readily available. So I anticipated that to really be something that we could handle completely in-house and if necessary with a little bit of assistance, but it is something that we have on our list of items for communication tools, as well as social media. I'll just toss that in while we're on the topic. So we do plan on using both of those, but again, utilizing an internal resources to address both of those because we'll already have the content creation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any other questions regarding the budget from the committee?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
So on that note, Christine, that was really helpful to hear a little bit, again, for me, kind of understanding the project manager piece, to hear a little bit about what we envision our city team doing. So that might be something that I'd want to hear a little bit more about, either if you have some information now or tomorrow, just understanding what that looks like from an internal perspective here.
Absolutely. Councilor Chair Bather, Councilor Cassette Sanchez, I'm happy to discuss a little bit more. We can absolutely prep some information for tomorrow night, but yes, trying to look at ways that we would integrate a bit with the city. The primaries, I think, areas would be in the ways we push out communication. So utilizing our city website, but creating a special link or redirect so that we'd have a specific URL, but we'd still have the ability to edit content immediately and in-house. That's really important for us. So that's one of the ways that we'll use internal staff. Similar with social media, we'll probably use some of our, I mostly handle social media with Michaela on our team. And so again, having the content creation helps us be able to leverage our internal capacity a bit more because it's a really consistent message. And then we'll be able to use some of our city social media channels. Of course, if the council would like information in their newsletters, we absolutely will include some of those tools and outlets as well, but making sure that at least on our side, we're making our communication very interwoven between what we have even in press releases going out on the city side and using, again, our own tools. So I see a lot of it in our communication pieces. And then Pauline and I are working on ways that we would continue to use kind of our own capacities to further those.
Thank you, Christine. That was helpful.
Absolutely. Councilor Batha, if I could just one quick comment before I pop off. I just really want to tell the council I appreciate your feedback on this. Pauline and I, came with a draft and very much appreciative of the discussion and just the feedback. It's really helpful as we develop to make sure that we know areas that are important to the council and supportive, and then also just the feedback is very beneficial, at least for me to hear. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. And on that note, I think the communication piece, what I'd like to see is that the public can contact the city and doesn't have to figure out who the project manager is or what company's doing this or what. I think if you're a member of the public, you should be able to contact the city, either telephone, via email, or in person, and get all the information you need on what's happening and how they participate. So I would expect that your office would be, that would be real prominent with our information. If you're looking for information regarding chart, here's who you contact or who you email, and we respond immediately. Because it could be confusing, like who's in charge, especially when we are dealing with project managers from the outside or facilitators. So thank you. Okay, then let's go ahead and talk about the substitute resolution in itself, and specifically Councilor Villarreal's amendment. So I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So last night I just said this briefly, but the original resolution, I think we all struggled with in terms of the language and the flow and the process. And that was why there were so many amendments that came forth to the original resolution. And I was happy to see that this substitute resolution, which the concept itself is not a new concept. I believe Councilor Garcia actually brought this up months ago of the process that was happening in Albuquerque. So I'm glad we're looking at this possibility as a model that we could use. I think this particular, the substitute resolution is less top-down focused. There is more focus on how the community dialogue piece is like the first and foremost component to really getting to the issues on the table and where people are coming from. So I think that that's important. And my amendments are based on or really focus on trying to clarify the process and some aspects that I thought were not clear to me. It was also based on some public input that we received via email, and also from input from some of my colleagues that expressed concerns last night in Public Works Committee. So I don't know if it's what's the best way to go through this? I have the marked up track changes in front of me that all of you also received. So I don't know if it helps to go through those or if you all have already reviewed them, and then I can answer any questions specific to those changes.
Councilwoman Villarreal, yes, I received your amendments and I didn't have any problems with them. But so I guess maybe let's start by raise your hand if you want to talk about a specific amendment. And that's how we'll handle it, because maybe we can get through it without you having to go through every single one. So let's start with Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilwoman Villarreal, for putting this together. I don't have problems with most of it. The one thing I am concerned about is the amendment about providing quarterly updates to the council. And while I have no problem with us getting those updates, and I think quarterly sounds reasonable, and I think, we've talked about a website to help upload content as it becomes available, in making sure we're communicating where we are in the implementation of this structure. I am concerned that the content of what comes to the council should be process and not, what is it, Councilor Casat-Sanchez, and not substance, right?
It was process, not content.
Okay, so process, not content. And I just want to see if you would be willing to, I think your language as written slides a little bit into content, and I'd like to make sure that we keep it process oriented. And I would just, in my meetings with folks in Albuquerque, they really, and I think there is something I think I shared with you about how, they wanted to keep it process oriented. Like, how many people have we reached out to? How many community dialogue cohorts have we completed? How many more are in the queue? What that kind of thing I think is fine. But emerging themes that are coming out of that community-centered dialogue, I think we want to let that be. and let it really blossom without our interference. So I just would ask that we tweak that language a little bit to make sure that we stay process focused on those reports.
Okay, and just for the clarification, we're talking about page 4, I believe line 17, it would be a new insert, a further resolved insert, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Councilwoman Villarreal, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I actually would rather have us be updated on process versus content, because if you give content and it's still in the middle of the process, it may skew things, and I don't think it would really give people a clear picture, or us as elected officials a clear picture of what's happening. I was really wanting more updates, quarterly updates on their progress, like how many people had been participating, and I said this after each community dialogue round and major engagement session, because I would like to know how many people participated and how those are going, just generally. So
Yeah,
there's
that's the language I have trouble with.
So what would we, I mean, I'm
So-
open to suggestions for this. I just want to make sure that we have a minimum of quarterly progress
Yeah.
reports that we kind of hear from the facilitation team and project team about how things are progressing, especially, I mean, my biggest concern is really making sure that we're reaching the people we need to reach, and that it's diverse, and that there's not the usual suspects that always have time to participate in community engagement activities, but people that actually have not just a vested interest, but they're stakeholders. So that's why I wanted to get updates. So I'm open to another suggestion about how to word that, but I definitely want it to be regular updates.
So, Mr. Chair and Councilor, what I would do is right now, I would have it read something like, be it further resolved that the governing body will be provided at a minimum quarterly progress reports to be informed about participation levels and activities that have been undertaken. And I would be okay with that language.
Be informed about participation levels and what?
This is straight from what you already have. I'm just deleting a little bit. To be informed about participation levels and activities that have been undertaken.
Got it.
And if that language were what was being put forward, I could support that.
That's essentially what I said. I put in that they would come around the time that major sessions occurred. But if we say activities, I think that fulfills that piece.
Well, and I think that the point is that there may be lots of activities that are going on, but every time an activity happens, they don't have to run and tell us about it. But quarterly, we would like to know what progress has been made in implementing this process, this structure, this community-centered structure. And yeah. I've got coyotes outside my window. Sorry, I was momentarily couldn't figure out what that was.
So it would read, be it further resolved that the governing body will be provided at a minimum quarterly progress reports and updates to be informed about participation levels and activities that have been undertaken.
Let me try it one more time. Be it further resolved that the governing body will be provided at a minimum quarterly progress reports to be informed about participation levels and activities that have been undertaken.
I'm fine with that. That's basically my language.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Anything else on that point?
Mr. Chair, that's all. That's the only thing. I'm okay with most of these changes. I think, you know, they are mostly language changes, tightening of some of the clauses, and I don't have a problem other than that.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, did you have any questions or concerns or comments regarding the proposed amendments?
No, my comment was the same as Councilor Romero Worth on making sure that we were looking at process, not content in those updates. And I want to thank Councilwoman Villarreal for bringing this amendment forward. I do think that it did clarify a lot of areas. There were some that I felt read a lot better, and there were some that I didn't realize that it needed to read better until you presented something better. So thank you for bringing that, and I do support this amendment. Amendment as amended.
Thank you. Councilor Lindell.
No, I'm fine with it.
Okay, Councilor Villarreal, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think Councilor Romero Worth has more. I just wanted to clarify some points that were brought up last night, that I added some language changes so that the public and also my colleagues that are listening in know what was adjusted.
Okay. Councilor Romero Worth, do you want to finish your thought, and then we'll go back to Councilor Villarreal to kind of wrap up the
Right,
amendment.
and thank you, and I'm sorry, I just was scrolling through this again. The only other thing I want to make sure that we're all in agreement on is the change on page 3. It would be lines 13 through 15, where it talks about the interviews mirroring the guiding questions and prompts utilized in the community dialogues and community survey. And I guess I seek your thoughts on this. When I met this afternoon with Dr. Sanchez from Albuquerque, and I talked to her directly about this question, I think this is a good change. I just want to make sure that she talked about their experience, and when they were interviewing people, they certainly, the questions mirrored, the different processes, because what we're doing here is creating different ways for people to participate in the process. But in the interviews, sometimes they went beyond what might have been provided in a survey or in the community dialogue sessions. And I think it's because of the nature of those interviews, when you're one-on-one with somebody, and these would be people who would be sought out because we want to make sure we capture their story. We want to make sure we capture their thoughts, and it'll be part of the contextualizing our histories. And I just want to make sure that this language isn't going to preclude an interviewer from going beyond what maybe you would capture in a survey or a community dialogue because of the nature of the interview.
Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Councilwoman Romero Worth. I think that's a good point. And I think that will always be the case, but we do need to have guiding questions and prompts that are consistent between the one-on-one interviews, the community dialogues, and community survey, which I'm hearing they did that. There is a consistency, but if it goes beyond that and there's more storytelling and more in-depth conversation that happens, absolutely, that's important. I just want to make sure that we have similar questions that are for consistency purposes, and as we used to call triangulation, so that there's different methods of gathering data, that we all have similar, that there's similar questions that are compiled so that we can track it better in terms of the qualitative and quantitative aspects of data collection. So that was why I added that there should be consistency. If there's another way to say that, I really just wanted it to be consistent, that the guiding questions and prompts are followed in individual interviews and community dialogues and the survey.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I just want to make sure that we're not precluding that ability. And so I don't know, as any of you look at this language, if there's a suggestion about how to make sure that it's not just, the same things in each thing and that's all you can do, and maybe just bringing it up here as one way to say, we want more, but if the situation provides it. So I don't know if I don't have a recommendation is the problem, but I agree with you, generally speaking. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Villarreal, do you want to give us kind of like a wrap up regarding your amendment in general and your thoughts?
Yeah, I have other questions that I wanted to ask, but in terms of my amendments, in regards to the discussion last night, the piece about having community dialogue sessions with organizations. On page 2, line, it's between 7 and 10, that be it further resolved talked about the project team, and they will facilitate the convening of community dialogue sessions with organizations, and as appropriate, a number of community dialogue sessions open to community members who may or may not be affiliated with a particular community organization. I thought was to make clear that you don't necessarily have to belong to a certain group or organization to be able to participate and be part of community dialogue sessions. The other thing was about having meetings in person pending the public health criteria status, that would be a priority to do them in person. But obviously, if we have to resort to online platforms, I just changed the language based on the recommendation of Counselor Vigil Koppler.
Yes.
So the other were just language changes to clarify process and conducting these engagements, activities with artists, that the community survey would be conducted in multiple language in an equitable manner. And so I'm hoping that the budget will afford a professional person that actually knows how to formulate surveys. And then let's see, anything else? I think the only other thing I added is down below on page 4, that it talks about how the governing body would participate in diversity and inclusion training. I did add that the governing body and the city project team would participate in diversity and inclusion training, either individually or in small groups, in order to have a better understanding of implicit biases as it relates to this community engagement process and beyond. So it was just trying to link it back to this process, and that obviously that training will go beyond just this community engagement process. So I think that's important. And just on a point that Councilor Garcia brought up last night, he talked about how that particular kind of training should be afforded to more than just the governing body. And I just wanted to iterate that since I've been on council, have been asking for anti-bias, or in this case, diversity inclusion trainings for our staff, entire staff of the city, including the governing body, since I started on council. And we still have not been able to implement that in a way that I think has been really direct. So that is something that I have planted the seed way long ago. And I just want to note that that's something that I want us to continue thinking about, not in terms of just this process, but how we need it internally and for our staff to be able to provide more, to see things from a more global or world view. I think it's very important for us to progress in the way we do business and the way we interact with the public, that kind of training is crucial. So just wanted to put that out there because I know there was a comment about that last night.
Okay,
Mr.
thank
Chair?
you. Yes, Councilor Merleworth.
On that point, something that came up in a conversation I had with Dr. Sanchez in Albuquerque this afternoon, morning, today, whenever it's all a blur. The one thing that she also mentioned, and I don't know that we need to call it out, but I will just say it here for Pauline and for Christine, as they think about the city project team and how we do this work, is that we might also want to provide opportunities for the governing body individually or in small groups to participate in in these community, not participate in the community dialogue session with the community members, but maybe amongst ourselves or, with our own group of friends or whatever, have that opportunity just so we have a sense of what's happening in those community dialogue sessions. And maybe we get some of that same wisdom that will come through those conversations. So I don't want to call it out here in the resolution, but I just think, for us to have that experience on our own might, and separate from the community, because again, this is a community-centered process. I want the community to not be influenced by our presence in the room. I want them to have the freedom to speak among themselves and to each other without, trying to influence us one way or another as the ultimate decision makers. So I just throw that out while we're on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, anything else from the committee? As part of the amendments, I saw that Councilor Garcia, there are 2 amendments, language amendments that were included in a substitute red line that Jesse Guillen provided to us. Councilor Garcia, did you want to talk about those 2 amendments?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I included some language, which I felt the current language is a little punitive, and I felt it would needed to be a little more inclusive in some senses. And so with that being said, on page 1, line 20, I included the language. So the sentence will now read, whereas the city understands the urgent call to action to discuss the city's cultural histories and current viewpoints to seek solutions for a future of peace. And this is where I've included language: tolerance, racial equity, social justice, and the rest is previous language. And the second part of the amendment is to include language on page 5, line 7, and adding the language on line 7 for a future of peace. And then I include tolerance of racial equity and social justice. So it's language insertion that I felt was just a little more inclusive in some senses. So I don't know if any of the finance committee members have any questions about that, and happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Councilor Garcia? Okay, are we ready to act on the substitute? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you. I do agree with Councilor Garcia's changes. I think they clarify the language. I did have a couple questions that you probably saw on the markup that came forth. You probably saw the comments I made that I had questions on. So I think, should I bring them up now? I mean, even though we've gone through the amendments, I just have questions on process for certain sections that I would like to hear from either staff or my colleagues about how this will work.
I think that's up to you if you want to hear today and tomorrow, or we'll hear them all tomorrow. It's really up to you if you want.
I think it'd help to talk about it tonight, so that if there's potential for any language changes or amendments that will happen for tomorrow's meeting. We've had conversations about the community solutions table and how it's established. And on page 3, it says at the beginning of that section, or no, line 14, it says the community solutions table will be established to include representatives who have participated in all 3 community dialogue sessions. And so my question is, what if a person cannot participate in all of those 3 community dialogue sessions for whatever reason, work or other, but they would actually be a good additional or unique voice to serve on the community solutions table group? How do we mitigate that and make sure that we're including people that do have perspectives that would be important on the community solutions table, but they weren't able to participate in all 3 community dialogue sessions?
Councilor Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilor Villarreal. So this process on purpose creates a structure for how you get to participate in the community solutions table. You have to complete all 3 community dialogue sessions, and they are facilitated, and they are meant to create buy-in, to build trust, and to broaden the perspectives of the folks who go through that process, so that they are in the best possible position to sit at the community solutions table and think about what our next steps are as a community to go forward as we contemplate in this resolution. I think the reason why we also provide for surveys and for interviews is that, let's say we have, say, an older member of our community who we really value the wisdom and the life experience that they have had. And we want to make sure that voice and that story is captured. Because again, part of what we're doing in these community dialogue sessions is capturing our collective stories. And we will be able to use those in a multitude of ways as we contextualize our histories. And so our collective history. And so I think that that's how, if there's a particular person in our community that you want to make sure we hear their story, and also what they think about their values, our shared values, and their ideas for how we move forward, then that's what those interview processes are really designed to do. And also the surveys are a quick way to get other input from people who may be too busy to invest their time in the process. I will tell you that in Albuquerque, apparently they had about 100 people, is my understanding, who completed the 3 community dialogue sessions. But then when it came down to participating in the community table, only about 50 of them did. And so we could have that situation as well. But what they said and the ideas that were provided for at the community dialogue sessions, I mean, their participation was not lost just because they didn't participate in the community table, because what they said during the dialogue sessions was captured and was part of what was compiled for contextualizing our histories, and also for contextualizing our history, and also for talking, for consideration by the community table for possible solutions.
Thank you for that additional information. And I realize the importance of consistency and participation. I just want to make sure that, I'm not sure when the community dialogue sessions will be held, and hopefully they'll be held in, times, days, even weekends that are accessible to working people.
Yep.
And I want to avoid having a community solutions table made up of just retirees because they have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So,
and I agree. And I think some of that will be incumbent on us taking the time that's required by this process. Certainly one of the things that they said in Albuquerque is they wish they had had more time to get conveners. And I think, the project team will see, I mean, if it's starting to look too skewed towards, let's say, retirees who have a lot of time, then they're going to have to double back and make sure that they're doing, what needs to be done to get rid of the barriers for folks to participate in the process. It was pointed out to me that, basically this is representative democracy. We're creating a community centered process, and you know what? Come out, participate, lend your voice. We're asking for it. We need it. And people, have to invest in the community. So, and we, I think, can help by offering these meetings at times where people who are working during the day might be able to participate. I think the child care idea is a very good one. And there may be other things that we can be doing to help make sure that we get the cross-section of participation. And I didn't read this last night, but the resolution specifically calls out that the community solutions table should be diverse, and it calls out what kind of diversity we seek. And it's a pretty lengthy list of folks that we would like to make sure sit at that table. And so I think we're going to need time, and we're going to need to have a lot of work on getting a cross-section of conveners.
So you mentioned, Councilor Romero worked at Albuquerque. They had about 100 people that participated in all 3 community dialogues. So then what was the process they used to be able to narrow it down so that 50 people would be part of the community solutions table?
People just self-selected. I don't, I think it was just, they thought, okay, I've participated enough. They've captured what I had to say. Because the other thing I didn't realize until today was that the community solutions table, they look at all the information captured from all the different mediums that we're using, right? So they're going to look at the surveys, they're going to look at the interviews, they're going to look at the themes that arise out of the community dialogues. So it's not just, if you have 50 people, it's not just their stuff that's on the table. They get to look at the whole process and take a run at looking at what the community said and trying to sift through that in a way to bring some consensus around some of the ideas that get brought forward.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if there's a way to clarify about how membership is determined.
Well, membership is determined by completing, it says it in there.
It does, but then what? Like you just said 100.
Well, no, but so all 100 could have participated. I actually asked Dr. Sanchez this afternoon about the idea of what happens if we had 1,000 people who went through, and I don't think we will have 1,000 people, but that's a happy problem to have. That means that we have a community fully engaged and participating. And what she said to me is that is a facilitation problem that can be overcome. What they did in Albuquerque, even with the 50 people, is they broke them into small groups and worked with them in small groups, and then they came back as a whole. And one of the things that they wished that, again, that they had more time, and I think we're building in more time, is that there was more time for the community solutions table to work so that they could come up with more robust recommendations than what they ultimately did, because they were really in this hurry up offense where they had to create a process, implement a process, and report out a process in too short a time period. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we get the benefit of their experience, and by providing a year, we may need longer, who knows, as we move along here, but a year is much longer than they had to get, more representation, to provide more time for people to really consider all the information, all the stories, all the ideas that percolate up through this community-centered process.
So one other clarity piece that and question I had about the community solutions table, and once it forms, the section that says they shall hold at least 2 to 3 facilitated sessions. And I'm wondering, is that then just for the community solutions table members, or,
Yeah.
or how do other community members participate in this phase of the community engagement?
They don't. It's just for the community. If you want to sit at the community solutions table, you need to complete all 3 community dialogue sessions. And the idea behind that, again, is it's a process, right? We want to bring you in. We want to build trust. We want to have you share your story and and tell us about your values and give us your ideas. And that process hopefully helps us, talk to helps not us, because we won't be doing it, but helps the community members talk to each other and build trust in each other and start to better understand each other so that we can figure out how we move forward collectively. It is sort of like the diversity training that's being called out for counselors and staff. I mean, and they call it the arc of the dialogue. And if you don't participate, if you don't make the commitment to that dialogue, that arc of the dialogue, then you don't sit at the community solutions table because you haven't invested the time and made the commitment to be there.
I think there's also a requirement, some kind of commitment too from the community solutions table that they have to do some work, because they're actually looking at
Yep.
and reviewing all of the documentation from the rounds of community dialogue sessions, the surveys, the engagement sessions, etc. So there is some work to be done that they would be required to do, right?
Yeah, no, they're going to be sifting through all the information that's collected from the surveys, from the interviews, from all the community dialogue sessions, and trying to build some consensus and compile that information so that then gets forwarded to the governing body, and we then decide what to do with that. And we want to give the time necessary for these conversations to be had, and for, as they said in Albuquerque, robust recommendations to come forward.
So essentially that they're a working group, and it's not just about providing your input and what you think about what should be done. It's actually taking into consideration what other people have said.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
All right. Those are all the questions I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Councilor Villarreal. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. There's just one thing that I wanted to point out, and it was touched on with this conversation about the diversity of the community solution table, and making sure that at the end of the process that the individuals that come to that essentially qualify to sit at the community solutions table is a diverse group. And I know that I've had some conversations, I think, with Councilor Romero Worth about this, potentially mayor, but a few people about what this looks like if at the end of the day, and that is really going to be up to our staff and up to this team to be keeping an eye on that, and to be really sweeping around and making sure that we are getting those diverse voices. I think that's really important to note, that once we do kind of round one or round two, round three, and if we don't feel that we have the diversity that we need to get the solution, that because we've built in the time, that we can go back and start this process again and run those sessions through. Am I correct in that understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're not seeing that we're getting groups that if we're not getting the diversity that we look for, and I don't know that it's going to be that's us. I think that's the city project team. They need to be keeping an eye on that. And again, what they did in Albuquerque is they sat down, the city project team, and they made a list of every organization in the area that they could think of. They looked for people who were community influencers, who are art influencers, and then they began to reach out to those people, or to reach out to people who knew those people, to try to bring them into the process. And again, I mean, if we create a community-centered, credible process, people will want to participate, right? If we're meddling in it, I don't think we're going to get the kind of participation that we seek. And one of the things that Dr. Sanchez said this afternoon that I wrote down because it really resonated with me is that we have to trust the community members to come into dialogue with each other and to find a path forward. And so what we're trying to do is create that structure, create that process, and get rid of, barriers like childcare or, making meetings be in the middle of the day. We need to have meetings in the evenings and on weekends so that we can cast as broad a net as possible. And, you do have to make a commitment, and not everybody will want to do that. But again, there are other ways to have your voice heard through interviews or through surveys. And I think we will get a cross section of our community, because the resolution calls out specifically that's what we're seeking. That's the goal.
Thank you. And I have one thing that I also thought about in terms of, because I also struggled with Councilor Villarreal as well, of, well, what happens if somebody, because of all of these barriers, they can't make it to the community solutions table because of these issues? And again, that's on our city team to eliminate those barriers as best as possible. But I think also there will be a lot that comes through that process that will be giving individuals the tools to come to the community solutions table with that, idea towards consensus building and having gone through the process. So
it is
but
representative democracy, right? So even if you don't personally sit on the table, what we're trying to do is make sure that your views are there, right?
Yes, and that's why, again, just looking at some of the other barriers, especially if we are moving to in-person models, because I can imagine that in-person models would absolutely be preferable for these types of communications. Not just days and times. I also want to make sure that we're thinking about locations, locations that are spread out throughout our city, locations that are on bus lines, just any way that we can eliminate all of the barriers that could be for somebody being able to make it to this. One question about the community solutions table. So it's 2 to 3 sessions. Is the idea that it is 2 to 3 sessions with everybody that's on the community solutions table, and these 2 to 3 sessions build upon each other, or are there 2 to 3 different opportunities to be at one community solutions table meeting? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, my understanding in Albuquerque is that the group of 50 met more than once. And again, the way they handled the number was to break out into small groups for a period of time and then come back together. And they did say they wish they had had more time. If I could, Counselor, the other thing I would add to some of your concerns is these are complex issues, right? Really difficult issues. And I think, we want people who will commit the time and really build the trust and participate in a full way in order to find the path forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that's key. And as to the concern about us having too many people at that community solutions table, I hope that that's a problem that we have to deal with. To be honest, with a lot of the problems we've been dealing with, that would be my favorite problem for us to deal with these days. So, and we wouldn't even be there. So actually we wouldn't have to deal with it. Okay, thank you. I just want to say that I do want to, I know that it was a long journey to get to this version of this resolution, but I think that we are on a much better path than we started on. And I think that this does help capture the voices and really, Councilor Merworth, as you said, these are sticky issues. These are complex. These are not going to be easily and readily solved. So I do appreciate the work that I know has gone into speaking with the team from Albuquerque and really looking at how we might be able to utilize this here. So I do just want to thank the sponsors who have put forward this replacement resolution, substitute resolution. That is all.
Okay, are we ready for a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd move that we approve the resolution with Councilor Villarreal's amendment and Councilor Garcia's amendment. And just to make clear that the amendment from Villarreal would have that one slight tweak in the language that we discussed.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
You sure may. Councilor Abeyta.
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Councilor Lindell.
Yes.
And Councilor Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item I, which is a request for the approval of the agreement between the City of Santa Fe and American Traffic Solutions, Inc., DBA Vera Mobility, for providing equipment and services for the Santa Fe Traffic Operations Program. Stop American Traffic Solutions, Inc., DBA Vera Mobility. Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a few questions on this. Clarifying that we are using 6 devices. That's a question.
Okay, staff. Mr. Valdez. Yeah, you're on.
You're muted.
Joe, are you there? Can Mr. Valdez be unmuted or?
I'll try. I'll give it my best shot, sir.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Sorry for that. Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, yes, we will be requesting 6 devices in the form of 4 transportable devices, which will be like a small mailbox type device, and then 2 vehicle devices, which would be similar to the speed vans that we had in the previous program.
Do we know where the 4 pedestals will go? Are they such that you put the pedestal there, and can you change, so you said there's 4 units that go on a pedestal. Could you place 8 pedestals and move the technology from one pedestal to another?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, so with the devices, what's been explained to me by the vendor is a pedestal would not be required. It is, as long as it has easement where we can place the device, it's large enough and stable enough for us to place it at a place that would accommodate the ability for it to capture violations and not be on either private property unless we do have an agreement with the property owner. But we won't need to put any pedestals for those transportable devices as long as we have easement or a location to deploy it. They'll be able to deploy in those spots. It'll have the ability to stay there and notify us if there's any tampers as well. So it'll be able to stand alone at any location that would be suitable of installation.
Is this program replacing all of our current handheld radar program?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, no, it's not. This program would only be utilized for violations that are captured via video. Our officers will still have their handheld radar devices, LiDAR, or in-car mounted radar detection or radar speed devices. And
Okay.
those would be different from these ones.
Okay. It was a little unclear in the memo. It almost made it sound like we were using this company exclusively for everything that we were doing for speed control, but bear with me. I just have a couple other questions. This is just based on finance and fiscal prudence. I see they have in here their fees for expert witness. When would we need an expert witness for a traffic citation?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, if it was a complex type of case, we may need an expert witness if an individual wants to contest the violation. The vast majority of the cases that were brought up with our previous program, usually they'd come in, they would train one of our staff members to know how the device works, to be able to provide their working knowledge on how it operates. And in cases where it would be very complex, that would be those times where we would need to bring in an expert witness. But for the vast majority of the cases that are contested, that can be handled by our staff.
Well, that's good, because in as much as we get about $5 per citation to fly in an expert witness and pay for their travel and their hotel and lodging or meals, it's not a very good deal for us. So that's where I was going with that. The other thing that it talks about is the enhanced video services. Are we prepared, and do we have the capacity for the storage that they require?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, All we need to do is have network access to access their server, and those violations will be stored on their server. Nothing is housed on our server, so the capacity issue will not be anything that would hold this back. It'd be all done on their server.
Okay, because I saw a part in here that talked about us having capacity, so we don't have to pay them extra for that.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, no, we do not.
Okay. This is probably not a question for you, Mr. Valdez. Maybe it's a question for Ms. McCoy, if she is still on here. I looked at the back of the packet where they present their business registration. And I thought it was interesting that they have a business registration as opposed to a business license. And they pay $10 for that business registration. I pay $35 for my business license. How come they don't have to buy a business license?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, I will ask that question to our business license office and get back to you with a response.
Okay, it just seems like it's not their fault. I mean, that's what their charge is. But that's something that we might look at correcting. I mean, it seems like anybody, maybe we don't need to have the difference between a business registration and a business license. And people that want to do business in this city could pay $35. It's not going to fix the budget, but it might help. Those are the questions that I had on this contract. I appreciate it. It took us a long time to get here. I know there's some people that don't like it, but I think that I can speak for every counselor on this Zoom call that we've all had multiple calls this summer of people speeding and drag racing around this city. So we can't have it both ways. To do the enforcement that people are asking for, this seems like a reasonable path that we chose, I believe, over 2 years ago. So I'm anxious to get this going. One other thing I would say on the record is that we dramatically changed the citation fine schedule. We also added in the ability to do community service. And we tried to make it very, very fair for everyone. So I'm anxious to get this going. I have a perfect location on Gonzales Road for you. You can call me and I'll walk from my house right out there and show you where a good spot would be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I think Councilwoman Villarreal had her hand up before me, so.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't see that. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I think Deputy Chief Valdez, it was helpful to get the background for counselors that hadn't been around for this fun trip that we've been on for this particular item. It was actually 2017 that this was approved. I didn't vote for it. And I know that it took a while to get where we are today. I guess I'm just curious, what was the delay to relaunching this program after contracts? I thought contracts had been approved. I think December was the last meeting that we had, or maybe January. So what's been the delay to get this going from that last meeting that you all presented to us?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, the first thing we brought forward was, I believe, the change to the ordinance. And we also did an informational meeting early on with some of the members of the council. Once we had the RFP out, we started working with the vendor to work on the contract. Got a lot of great help from finance, from their staff. And the big thing was we had our contract in the previous format. So we had to reformat the contract into the current format that we utilized, been utilizing for the past about a year and a half or so. And we're just going through the negotiating process with the vendor, making sure that everyone was able to agree to it and they were amenable. Made sure everything was good and nice and set up for the city, making sure that everything that we needed from the contract was being fulfilled. And we're doing our best to make sure we get it right. It took a little bit of time, and even through the process, I worked with a second contact from the company because they transitioned to another one. And again, we got everyone up to speed, and it was a lot of people participating, a lot of help to get where we're at today. So, my appreciation goes to finance and also city attorney's office for helping us through this. They did a fantastic job making sure that we get a good contract for this program so we can make a positive impact, improve safety on our roads.
So it took a year essentially to get all the pieces together to where we are today.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think you already know, I guess I would rather see funding for this contract to be spent on officers and actually hiring officers to do that work and to support and help with the speeding issues that we have in the city. So I will not be voting for this, and I would just like to see how it moves forward, and then to be convinced that this is working, then I would consider, whatever time period we get to when we renew the contract, that I'll reconsider that. So just wanted to let you know why, and I appreciate all the work that you all have done to get this move forward, and I'm hoping that it will be that it functions the way you want it to function. So that's all I say. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I actually struggle with this one a little bit as well, similar to Councilwoman Villarreal, looking at staffing. I feel like this is my new thing that I talk about every twice a meeting. But so a couple questions. One, you had mentioned in the memo about the number of speeding citations that are issued when the STOP program was being employed. How much of an increase do we see with actually catching speeders and issuing citations with STOP?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Casa Sanchez, is that in comparison to having an officer out there, or in years comparison to now?
Compared to not having the program going. I know it must be a little challenging because we have also lost staff, correct? We've lost staffing capacity since before. So yeah, I'm just curious, how much does it really increase our ability to catch speeders and cite them?
Councilor Casa Sanchez, with this process, if we looked at it, one benefit of this manner to capture violations is, if that device is there, again, we're not going to have a gotcha moment. We're going to publish the location so everyone knows where they're at. We're going to have advanced signage on approach of the devices. So if that doesn't dissuade you from speeding, you'll get a notice in the mail saying you had a violation. And again, it's going to be a $50 violation if it's in any place outside of a school zone or a construction zone. And it just sits there and it'll issue those violations. If we look at the comparison with an officer being out there, they can issue citations as well, but each traffic stop will take 10 to 15 minutes per violation. So even if they see an officer on the side of the road, you still may have violations occurring. But what this does is it gives us some flexibility with our deployment of resources. These devices cannot be deployed on certain highways, and we want to focus our personnel who can issue citations on those highways, which are the ones that are maintained by the state of New Mexico. And again, it's education. The big thing we've seen learning through our blitzes, a lot of people don't realize that the speed limit is, for instance, I get this all the time, 35 on St. Francis between Alta Vista and the north side of Facility Peralta. They have no idea that that 3-lane highway is 35 miles per hour. And that education part is big. And that's a big part of this is we're still going to continue to let people know, here's what the speed limit is. We're trying to encourage good behavior while driving out there. But again, try as we will, some people, they may continue, speeding. And if they choose to do so, again, this program is self-funded. The violation goes out. Once the process is fulfilled, we settle that cost with the vendor. And pretty much that person self-funds the whole program through those violations. What we get back in return is a small amount. Again, this is not to be a big revenue maker. It's to improve roadway safety. So in that aspect, looking at the time it takes for an officer to go conduct a traffic stop, we could see that this type of device would be able to address that through education. We'll, send the message home that we want people to drive safely. I mentioned this to several people throughout this process before, and even talking with an individual about it a couple days ago. I would love to see the city of Santa Fe put this type of program out of business. And by doing so means that we're doing the speed limit, we're not speeding and racing and everything else. But again, it's going to be based on the behavior that people on the roadway engage in. But until that time comes, this will be another tool that we have to encourage people to obey the speed limit. And I know in your district, you can mention a handful of roads where you're like, oh my goodness, someone is going 20 miles over the speed limit and I can't believe this. If they want to continue engaging that behavior, it's going to get very costly for them. The difference in the two, though, this violation would be a civil infraction, much like we use for small amounts of possession of marijuana. So it doesn't go on their record. If they fail to pay it, they go to collections versus an officer being there. If you do get a citation and then they get either agreed to pay the penalty assessment or they're convicted of the violation in court, that does go on the record and it can affect their insurance, where this would affect your credit if you choose not to pay for the infraction.
And we can also, they can opt for community service as well, which is what we passed, I believe.
And that was a great piece. And I think, as far as I know, we're the only ones in New Mexico. I don't know if Rio Rancho offers that, but that's a great way for the city to, allow people to, learn from that infraction and say, hey, I'm going to do something good. And, they can help with our city with doing a number of things. We have a lot of programs in the city that can utilize a couple extra hands through a volunteer program.
The process for how it is decided where these units are placed.
So one thing that we are limited to is they cannot be like on St. Francis. They cannot be on Cerritos Road, New Mexico 599, or Interstate I-25. Those are the major highways that the state of New Mexico maintains. We have other arterial roads such as Rodeo Road, Siringo, Airport Road. We have a number of identified locations that we looked at based on data that we have, and everything is going to be based on either, we have a high number of motor vehicle crashes occurring in that area, or we have complaints from constituents saying, hey, there's a speeding problem in my neighborhood. So we're putting out those surveying devices that we call JAMRs to make those assessments, see if it's an enforcement area, and then we deploy that resource in that area to, rein in the speeding issues. And on top of that, we're going to be putting out, again, publishing the location. Hey, we've identified that this location is prime for speeders and it needs to end. We'll be putting a device out here, let people know, it's going to be out there. And again, advanced signage ahead of the device. It's not going to be hidden in a bush or camouflaged. It's going to be out there for people to know that it's there. And if they're violating the speed, it's going to issue a violation and send that notice in the mail.
Yeah, I do appreciate. I do like that there are a number of warnings. I know back when I was living in California, there'd be secret red light cameras that people would know about, and they would do really dangerous things to try to avoid being seen by them. And so I like that we are very transparent about where these are located, as it really does look like it's another deterrent for speeding. And then I'm sorry, I know I read this and I apologize, I don't remember. Can we move them? I think that 2 of them we can move and the 4 we cannot. Am I correct in that understanding?
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez. So what we're going to do is the transportable devices that look like a mailbox, those will be moved on regular intervals, maybe once a month or so. And that'll be based on where we need to deploy them on our assessment through data on where the enforcement location needs to be. The two vehicle devices, like a speed van, will give us a bit more flexibility where they can be moved at a much sooner frequency. So if we see some type of spree that comes up in a certain area, or if we need to make an adjustment to another location, that gives us the flexibility to do so. But they're going to be on a constant rotation throughout a number of locations if this is approved. And, again, we're going to publicize it. We want people to know. But having those speed vans, the two of them, that'll give us a little bit of flexibility because the company just gets in the vehicle, they drive it to the new location, they set it up to deploy, and they're good to go. With the other device, they have to come with a truck. They have to hoist it, take it over, deploy it, set it up, calibrate it, and then we're ready to go. So that's why it's at a much longer frequency versus the vehicle-borne devices.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. And then why did we stop before? Why did we stop doing stop?
From my recollection, there's a number of things. The previous vendor that we were working with had a lot of ethical issues that came up. It came, out in the media that they were doing things that were unethical. And that was, I think, a big driving factor. I think another side of it, a lot of people, they didn't really agree with the program because, again, no one likes to get a bill in the mail saying, hey, sorry, you were speeding, and here's what it was. But I think with the ordinance and the way that the governing body worked to address and the sponsors of the ordinance that did the changes, they looked at some of those issues because, again, it was a graduated system. If you had a violation, it was $100. If you had a second one, it was, graduated $150 and on and on and on. And it's just like it's piling on you. And for us, we want it to be more about, hey, look, you're caught speeding and it needs to stop. It shouldn't be to the point where someone cannot afford to pay their fees, where it's just being stacked onto them. And, sometimes, again, someone could have a number of violations and they could stack on them. And I think they made it a bit more equitable with the new language in the ordinance and also including the community service aspect of it. But if I had to take a guess at it, those would be the two major items that came into play were those items. And, people that had liked those devices in their neighborhoods, they were sad to see them go. People that were getting violations, they were on the other side of the spectrum. But again, we know there's going to be mixed feelings on this, but we want people to know that our main focus is safety. At the end of the day, if you do the speed limit, you won't get a violation issued and everything's going to be better of it. And again, through our blitzes, that's what we've seen. Most people don't realize, and even with the advent of new car designs, you don't get the road noise. You don't get that road rumble on these new car designs. So, you don't feel like you're going that speed. And until you realize it, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going this much over the speed limit. So the education part and the buy-in is huge. That's what we're looking to gain with this program.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I will say, as I think Councilor Lindell mentioned, speeding and traffic violations are something that I definitely hear a lot of. And Deputy Chief Valdez, you mentioned a number of the streets in my district that are have been extremely problematic, especially with the pandemic. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I went back and watched the City Council meeting of September 25th, 2019, where you provided an informational item on this. And at that time, you spoke of having 2 devices. How did we get to 6?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Romero Worth, based on what we're looking at, we wanted a number of devices. When we first rolled this out, we had, I think, 1 van, and all the way at the far end side of it, we had 4. With 6, based on what we're seeing through complaints we're receiving, areas of concern that have been brought up, we want to make sure we have sufficient devices to address those issues. By having these devices, our deployment methodology is going to be, it's going to be split right in half. 1 van and 2 transportables will be on the north side, and then the remainder will be on the south side. so we can make sure that there's no concerns about, hey, well, one side or the other is being more focused for enforcement. So based on the information that we had through speeding complaints, locations where we would need those devices, that's where we looked at to see what would be a good number to start with. We may see that, hey, this is either good for us, or we may come to the situation where, hey, we might need maybe 2 more devices to fulfill the needs of our community. But to roll this out, we looked at having, again, those transport devices were a game changer for us. That was not an option that we had beforehand. We only had the traditional speed van in our previous program. So, we always want to bring those vans back, but with those transportables, it gave us a bit more flexibility with deployment locations, because they could be on certain areas where you couldn't park a vehicle, but you can place a mailbox. So that's what gave us that ability. And again, it was based on our data on where the needs would exist in the city.
So the vendor isn't making you have a certain number to make the contract worthwhile on their end?
No, ma'am. They're offering, they say, here's what we have to offer. What do you guys need? And based on, again, our assessment, because the other side too is we have to process those violations. So if we were to put one of these devices at every location that we can at every intersection, again, that would really tax our personnel to be able to fulfill those violations and maintain the devices. So based on our current capacity and what we feel that we can do, that's the number that we feel that we can do based on the needs that we've identified through complaints and data.
And when I went back and watched the September meeting of 2019, we also discussed the possibility of having a pilot program. What happened to that idea?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Merrill-Worth, with this, we're going to have a grace period. But with the pilot program, we have a contract. If we find that this is something that is not meeting our needs, or it's not something we're pleased with, again, we have the contract. And if we wish to stop that contract, we give notice to the vendor, and then we start that process of decommissioning devices and going from there. There are certain provisions in there. So if we do end the contract prior to 1.5 years or 18 months, then we would be responsible for certain fees in doing so. But with the pilot, we've done plenty of blitzes to identify that, hey, we do have issues with speeding on our highways. With these devices, I think if we did a pilot, we'd probably come to the same conclusion that we would need these devices and they would be worthwhile to us. But if we identify that either the vendor's not providing the service that we expected, or we find that the program is not worthwhile for us, we can exit that contract without any issues after 18 months and say, hey, look, here's this, we're not going to renew it, and we're not going to move on. Again, the overall life of the contract is 4 years, but we can exit the contract at 18 months if we're not pleased with the service being provided by the vendor, or if we feel there's no longer a need for this type of program.
Right. With all due respect, I find that probably unlikely. I think it's, probably better if you had 2 and then you see that it's going well and the vendor's good, and then you add on. But this is a pretty deep dive into this technology. I guess I'm also so what limits the number of these things that we could have? I mean, is this just we'll have as many, we'll just keep building? I mean, if the contract, I mean, and the contractor, what's, I don't know. What limits the number of these things we could have?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Merrill-Worth, if we wanted to go and increase the devices to, let's say, 20, that could happen. But my concerns that would exist is, for one, managing all those devices and the violations that we would have to process. But once we do increase the number of devices, if we do decommission, there are certain provisions in there. So we can decrease a certain amount, and we'd have to work through that portion. So having the 6 devices, we felt that was a good number to start with. I think it'll fulfill the needs that we do need within the city for the life of this contract. But I'd really caution us against going too big, too fast. If we go for, I say, more than 10, I think for us, we'd begin to a situation where it'd be a pretty daunting task to, for one, maintain devices, and then secondly, to process the violations.
The last time we had this thing, you talked about advance notice and there would be signage so when you're coming up on one. The last time we had one of these situations, the signage was uneven, as I recall. You know, sometimes there was signage warning you that there was a speed van, and sometimes there wasn't. What will, how do we get more consistency in that?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Merrill-Worth, with the last program, I can't speak to the deployment of the signage, but with this one, we want people to know that it's there. We want to make sure they know, hey, photo enforcement ahead. We're going to be putting the locations and publishing them on our social media sites. With the previous program, they would actually post them in the local papers, but you know, with the advent of social media now, we can put it out there and it'll be picked up by you know, people that are either following us on our page or people will put it out. And we've even seen in some locations where you'll have certain mapping devices. If you use it for directions, will let you know, hey, there's a speed enforcement in this area, and they'll log those locations. And there's other websites as well that track those locations. We don't want a gotcha moment. You know, for us, we want people to know that they are out there. If you are speeding, you will be issued a violation. And the big thing that we're trying to do is educate people, let them know, hey, the speed limit in this area is this. You know, we don't want to get anyone caught in a gotcha moment. If you are caught in violation of speeding, it's going to be like, we gave you advance notice on social media. We let you know where we're going to put them. We have signage put up where it's going to be at. We're going to have the vehicles or the devices in a prominent location. They're not going to be, you know, hidden or anything like that. I think anything different from that, I think would be unfair. And that would not be within the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish with this program. We want people to know they're out there. We want them to watch their speed and to be aware of what the speed limit is in certain areas.
And just a comment on cars, since you brought it up, the idea that, you know, cars now, you don't know how fast you're going. I think there's some new technology that's been added to cars that I find helpful, in that they now can tell you what speed zone you're in, so that you actually, because I think sometimes that's a big problem is, you know, the signs, they're spread out and you don't, you know, it's 25 and then it's 30 and you don't know that it changed. But the car, all you have to do is look at your dashboard and the car says, you know, 25, you're in a 25 and hey, you're going 30. So you can slow down. And I guess, you know, I too struggle with this. I do have areas, in my district where we have issues and people have certainly complained, and we've done, you know, what can be done to try to mitigate it. But I also, when I was first elected, I got just bucket loads of emails of people who have real issues with this, the due process issues. Now, you know, with the pandemic, we have people wearing masks in their cars and, you know, you don't know who's driving. I know we've gotten around that by, I think our ordinance says that if it's your car, then you're responsible, doesn't matter who's driving. But still, I mean, I think there are ways around that. What happens if your license plate is dirty? What happens if you don't have a license plate? What happens if you covered up the license plate? What happens if your car is owned by a corporation and not by an individual? I don't know. I mean, I wasn't part of the council that approved this this ordinance, and I got to tell you, you're right. You know, it doesn't matter what you do here. You're gonna make people unhappy, because there are just as many people who hate these things, and they're not just speeders, but they hate them they hate them for equity issues. They hate them because of the due process issues. They hate them because they do spiral people into debt. And I appreciate that we've done some work around community service instead of just escalating fees. But I got to tell you, I don't like the number that we're starting with. I don't like the idea that, I mean, why not try a pilot since we had trouble with the last vendor? I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't ease into this. And so I just have to tell you, this is a hard vote for me. I really struggle with this issue, and I'm not sure I can support it. So thank you. Mr. Chair, one other question.
Yes,
Uh,
Councilwoman Romerworth.
Can you outline the how the fee structure works again? So there's $100 fine, and then who gets what portion of it?
It's 50.
Okay, $50 fine. All right, I was just using a hypothetical because it would be easier to understand. But help walk through the percentages of who gets what on that fine.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Merrill-Worth, for the fee structure, our fee is set for $50 for a violation that is captured outside of a construction zone or school zone. Of that $50, due to an NMAC rule, we have to give 50% of that to the state of New Mexico. So $25 goes to the state of New Mexico. What's left of that is 50%. So of that 50%, 40% or $20 goes to the vendor, and that's what they use for operating the program, sending out notices, maintaining the machines. Pretty much it covers the entire expense of what is needed for this program. And then the city gets 10%, so that would be $5 of that violation that we would get back into the program. And that funding would be utilized for traffic calming initiatives, small equipment such as handheld radar device, traffic safety vests, flashlights, batteries for body-worn cameras, things that would be utilized for traffic enforcement and traffic safety initiatives. Now, if it's a $100 fee, which occurs in a school zone or in a construction zone, again, it'd be that still breakout of 50% goes to the state of New Mexico, 40% to the vendor, and then the city of Santa Fe, our program would get the 10% remaining balance of that.
Thank you. Thank you for outlining that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councilman Villarreal, you still have but your hand up. Did you have another question?
Yeah, just a clarifying point. Remind me, Deputy Chief Valtez, these devices cannot be placed on St. Francis and Cerrillos because those are state jurisdiction roads, correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes, ma'am. The state passed a NMAC rule, I think it was back in 2010, which said any municipality operating a speed camera device would have to provide them, again, that 50% that we talked about with the fines, but it also prohibited the deployment of those devices on state maintained roads. So they can only put them on roads that are maintained by the municipalities or the county jurisdiction.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that for us again. And those are actually the main streets I get complaints on about speeding. So there you go. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what is the pleasure of the committee?
Move to approve.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second? I will second. Is there any more discussion? Councilwoman Lindell.
Yeah, I would just remind the council that we're not voting. We voted a long time ago on this program. We were looking at the contract. That's what we're being asked to look at. Every time this comes up, I think this is the third time we voted on this, but it's the contract. The council already voted to bring this program back. So that's the only comment that I have, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I guess that was my second, because I feel like some of the other counselors regarding this program, I can't recall how I voted if we did when it first came, because this is something in my district where I get both. I get complaints about speeding, but then I also get the equity issues. It seems like our streets are wider in District 3. There's more room for these. And so they feel like they're put in District 3 and 4 more than the other districts because of the street width. But so again, I'm voting on the contract, but we'll see how it goes.
Mr. Chair, and on those comments, if I could.
Yes, Councilwoman Romero-Worth.
I would also just remind us that money drives policy. And the informational presentation that we were given in 2019 suggested 2 of these, suggested the possibility of a pilot project as a way of easing into this. They didn't talk about 6, and they didn't talk about kind of an endless contract to continue to add more. So there are actually problems with the contract as well. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion before I call for a roll call on the vote? Okay, then can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, you can. Counselor Villarreal,
No.
Counselor Romero Worth,
No.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett Sanchez,
No.
and Counselor Abeta.
Okay, I will vote yes, but as I consider what both Counselor Lindell said and Romero Worth, if that was the understanding and now it's kind of expanded from when we originally voted on it to now, I may change my vote as it goes through the committee process and the council. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our business under the consent agenda. Matters from staff.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just quickly, I would like to remind the committee members that we have released the October GRT information to you. Year to date, we are down about 9.3 million total in GRT. That's about 20.5%. So total July through October, we're down 9.3 million in our GRT. So that most recent update came on Monday from the city manager. So that is in your inbox for the October 2020 update. We expect to be receiving the November 2020 update within the next week, and we'll be providing an update to you on that. So that'll be the first 5 months of the fiscal year. We have also given you a preliminary schedule for the budget hearings. I emailed that to you last week. And that those budget hearings are scheduled for April of this year. Okay,
and quickly on the GRT, did we budget assuming a 25% decline in GRT, or was it higher, or was it around the 20 that we're seeing now?
It was around the 20 that we're seeing.
Okay, so we're pretty close to what we had budgeted.
Correct. And again, as we move forward into the future months, we do expect with the increase in vaccinations and the potential to lift out of the red zone into yellow or potentially green throughout the remainder of this fiscal year, the opportunities to improve those numbers as the economy, different parts of the economy start to reopen at an increased capacity.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from the committee for Ms. McCoy? Okay, anything else, Ms. McCoy?
Mr. Chair, not at this time.
Okay, matters from the committee. Nothing from the committee. Okay, briefly under matters from the chair, one thing that I've been working with Ms. McCoy and actually have started working with the chairs of the other committees on are initiatives that I think are going to be forthcoming during this new year. For example, affordable housing. There's been a lot of discussion about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and how we fund that. And so I just want to make sure that this committee is coordinating with the other committees so that one doesn't get too far ahead of the other when it comes to actually moving forward with a specific maybe ordinance or resolution or direction, especially as it relates to the financial aspect of the proposal that comes forward. And so I appreciate Councilwoman Romero Worth and her committee quality of life taking the lead on the affordable housing initiatives and then kind of deferring to this committee when it comes to the financial pieces or impacts. There's other things such as the Midtown campus and again, Ms. McCoy, if you can send us a reminder of what our annual financial commitment is to that. I believe it's like $5 million, 2.5 in costs, operating or capital costs, and then another 2.5 in what we owe every year towards it. And then if you can send us the overall balance of that. I don't know if it's like 30 million but I think it'd be helpful if as we have these discussions with the entire council, that the finance committee has a real understanding of what the actual financial commitment towards that project is. Because I think that's, again, important for us to keep in the back of our minds as we talk about the other aspects of that project. And then of course, Ms. McCoy, there's the McCard report, the internal audit and the issues of the audits. So I would like to, as we dive into some of these other things, keep in the back of our mind, or again, information regarding that, especially as some of us go into re-election mode or campaign mode. I know the McCard report is going to come up because that was an issue when we ran 4 years ago. That was like, and so I think it'd be helpful to know that we are making progress and we are addressing a lot of those concerns. And then of course, there's the budget itself. This is going to be another brutal budget year because we're still in the pandemic. And so as much upfront information we can get and start scheduling presentations that you think we will need to get ahead of, let's go ahead and do that. Because it's, like I said, I think budget, it's going to be another tough year for us to budget. And so what I'll do is I'll try to capture these in an email. I'll distribute it to the finance committee and to you, Ms. McCoy. And then if everybody could, if I've missed stuff, please chime in, or if there's areas of focus that you would like us as a finance committee to take up, let's go ahead and respond to that email. And I saw in a meeting with Councilwoman Romero Worth, you kind of did something similar with quality of life, and you talked about specific presentations and how to schedule. And so I'll take a look at that, Ms. McCoy, and then maybe we can do something similar with the finance committee so that we see what's coming ahead, because I think we're going to be in for a really busy year, especially as a finance committee. Thank you. So I'll start working on that. Are there any comments or questions regarding that from the committee?
I would just add, Mr. Chair, I really thank you for meeting with me and with staff and the coordination work that we're starting to do, particularly around housing, and making sure that the presentations that are being presented to both committees really complement each other and help us build the understanding we're going to need to make decisions as we move through the year. So thank you for working with me on that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything else from the committee? Okay, then our next meeting is January 19th. Is that correct, Mary?
Yes, Mr. Chair, a week from today.
Okay, well, welcome back to a new year. And I thought this evening was really good. Thank you, Councilwoman Villarreal, for those amendments, and to the entire committee. This was a long night, but I think it was very productive, and hopefully we'll get past this chart issue tomorrow and we can move on to some other pressing business. So with that, we are adjourned. Have a good night. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.